Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to DACARI, the Dane County Arson Response Initiative, to our virtual online training. COVID put us in a bit of a predicament, and we weren't able to meet in person like everybody else, and we've taken it online. We've done 6 sessions. This is our 7th session today. We're sponsored by the Dane County Fire Chiefs Association, which is a conglomerate of 28 different departments located in Dane County, Wisconsin. And part of that is the Dane County Arson Response Initiative, or DACARI. We are a volunteer group made up of individuals that provide quality fire investigative training. We were doing it in person and have been doing it for 15, almost 17, almost 20 years. I've been the law enforcement coordinator for that for about 18 months. And we have some other volunteers on the board as well who are on this call. Prior to this session, we did live sessions, and now we've decided to try to record this session and then make it available to you as a viewer for about 2 weeks, and then bring back the instructor for a question and answer period, and quite frankly, so we can see each other and talk about things that are happening in the fire investigative world. So this recording will be made available through an email. If you've taken a prior class, you're going to get a notification about this. There will be a test that you can take for tested hours. You can receive your certificate for the tested hours. And then you also get an invite back to participate in the live question and answer period, which that date will be determined in that email. So enough of me talking. And so today we have Kevin Connolly, who is with the ATF. He's a special agent certified fire investigator. He's actually one of my classmates. We both graduated in 2016 from ATF's CFI program. He is based in Portland, Maine, as our lead instructor. And then we have Bill Boswell, who's with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, and he is a Wisconsin State Fire Marshal. Prior to being a State Fire Marshal, Bill Boswell was a fire protection consultant in the private industry. And if you're in Wisconsin, you know who Bill Boswell is, because he's one of the best fire marshals that we have in the state. So $20, that's all it's going to cost you, boss. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with Kevin. Kevin, go ahead and take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. First off, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If it's the middle of the night when you're watching this, that's great too. Thank you very much for logging on and taking the time to look at this presentation. I'm sure you've all been waiting for the report writing class, as it's always the sexiest part of any type of training, and especially when you can't do it in person, you have to do it online. I'm sure you just waited with bated breath to find out what I have to say. First off, thank you to Mr. Boswell and Mr. Fulton and the rest of the DACARI board for allowing me to present today. I really enjoy teaching. I enjoy kind of presenting this stuff and getting good feedback from fire investigators as much as I possibly can. You'll see I don't have all the answers for you when it comes to report writing. I have a background in writing. I was a journalism major in college, spent a year in law school. So there are some things that I toss into my reports that kind of try to head off any potential defense against what I'm writing. And also I have the ability to kind of think a little bit like a defense attorney. And I kind of I'm constantly scrutinizing my writing to figure out, okay, can my words be twisted? And hopefully I can impart some little tidbits of information that you'll be able to use in your own report writing down the road. So we're going to get right to it now. And we're going to go there. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. Origin and cause report writing. As we'll get to in this thing, it can easily be one of the most overlooked parts of the job. Everybody strives to be the best on-scene investigator that they possibly can be, but it doesn't always work out. And you may be great, but if you can't write a good report, then the work that you put in to become as good as you are on scene is going to be lost. It's going to be lost to whoever the reader might be. For the most part, for us as private, or excuse me, as public sector investigators, it's going to be lost on prosecutors who you want to work with to prosecute potential suspects. So in short, we want to get it right. We want to do it well, and we want to get it right. And this, like I said, I labeled this a guide for fire investigators. This is by no means any type of standard. This is not prescribed by 921. Heck, it's not even prescribed by ATF. I'm an ATF agent. There would be a lot of ATF CFIs who might not like the way that I write my reports. They may think that I don't add enough in. They may think that I add too much. I know that there are fire marshals here in my state who would say that I talk too much in my reports. I put too much in. This is my style. It's worked for me for the past 4+ years. It's constantly evolving. I don't have much of an ego when it comes to this stuff. I don't pretend that this is the be all end all, but I do have reasons for putting everything in it that I do. And hopefully, again, you'll take some knowledge out of this as we go. The objective's pretty simple. What's the characteristics of an expert report? Identify the information that should be in an O&C. How collected data, data analysis, and conclusions can be adequately described in a report. How proper O&Cs can be accomplished within the confines of an agency's format. ATF has their own format. I'm sure your individual agencies may have their own format. Hopefully, you'll be able to take something from this that will make your format better. And how we can work towards changing an agency's format. If your format isn't good, if your bosses are not are kind of not receptive, realize that it's your work. Try not to be too married to whatever format is told you have to use, and realize that if you're trying to prosecute somebody, this is your work. Your butt is on the line. So you want to get it right, and you want to do it the way that you're comfortable with. We'll start off real basic. I mean, we know what an origin and cause report is, right? We want to come to conclusions and allow the reader to come to the same conclusions of where our origin was and what caused the fire itself. It's the most effective way to explain your findings and reasonings to outside parties. You're not going to have the opportunity to call everybody that is involved in your case and explain to them your entire use of the scientific method. Explain to them how your methodology brought you to the proper conclusions for your case. This is the way that it's going to happen. You're going to start talking to a prosecutor. Their mind is going to go blank after about 5 minutes of you talking to them. You're certainly not going to get the chance, for the most part, to talk to defense attorneys or to your suspects, or you're trying to get to plead or something like that. This is the way you communicate to them, that you know what you're talking about and that you use the proper steps to get to that conclusion, whatever those conclusions might be. You've got to remember, and this is something that I really harp on, because a lot of times I'm talking to brand new fire investigators who may be coming from the police background, or like a line firefighter who has not written a report before. This is an expert document. Whether you think you're an expert or not, if you're writing an origin and cause report, you've got to realize that it's an expert document. You're offering an opinion, and in most cases, you're offering an opinion to the court. And in doing that, you're basically offering yourself up as an expert. It's going to contain relevant facts and well-reasoned opinions and conclusions based on those opinions that you're going to give to an attorney or to a judge, whether it be in civil court or in criminal court. You're still offering yourself up as an expert. So if you're sitting down to write one of these, you've got to consider yourself an expert. You have to leave the rest of whatever else you do during the day behind. And we'll get to what I mean by that. It's not a police report. This is not a who, what, why, where, and how. It is much more involved than that, because you take all of that stuff. All of that stuff is basically data that you're collecting, and you synthesize it. And we all know what our methodology is. We all know about the scientific method. What you're doing in this report is essentially putting that scientific method on paper. That's in any one of my reports. And I believe that's the best way to head off any immediate challenges to your work, is by showing that, yeah, I use a scientific method and this is how I got to my conclusions. But again, police reports don't use a scientific method, so don't consider it one. It shouldn't be written like one. It shouldn't read like one. It should read like almost like an academic paper, a scientific paper. So we'll talk a little bit more about 921 as we go. Obviously, there's a new edition out. When I put this together, we were still working off of the 2017 version. As far as reports are concerned, I don't know if 16.5 is still where they talk about reports, but I know that it basically stays the same, doesn't prescribe a format. It says you should meet the needs of the intended audience. It should contain data analysis of that data that allowed the investigator to reach conclusions, should mention the methodology, contain pertinent facts, contain opinions and conclusions. But again, it doesn't really give you much other than those tips for writing a report. As far as meet the needs of the intended audience, remember 921 is for everybody, public and private. So as a public investigator, you're going to be looking at your audience is going to be prosecutor, defense attorney, possibly a judge, whereas private sector would be much different than that. So what are the benefits of a good report? Why does it matter? First off, it ensures that the data and opinions are documented for later use in court, internal review, or whatever. Obviously, the main one that I'll keep harping on is court. A good report can be read by you years later when whatever case you're working on goes to trial, and you will be able to put yourself right back in that scene. Even though you've done hundreds of other scenes since then, you can get back into that scene in your mind by reading your report. That should be the goal for you personally. If you do that for yourself, you're easily going to be able to take the reader and put them in the scene when they finally get around to reading your report. And that's important, to get them to understand and to get them to agree, even if they have no training at all. I mean, who loves to disagree with people other than attorneys or tell you that you're wrong? If you can get them to see where your methodology led you and why your conclusions are the way they are, you're going to be in good shape. Secondly, prove to your chain of command or outside authorities your worth as an investigator. I work for an agency where my higher-ups are not CFIs. I turn my reports into someone who is not a fire investigator. Luckily, he knows that he's not a fire investigator, and he kind of he'll allow. He knows that he's not looking to read my reports to disagree with me, to agree with me, just that it makes sense. But that's not always the case. You want to write your report to show those higher ups, whether they're fire investigators or in the fire industry or not, that you know what you're talking about and that you are doing a good job either when you're on the scene or when you're sitting in front of a keyboard typing the thing up. And again, it's the first defense against oppositional opinions in adversarial court proceedings. My reports are long. My reports are upwards of 20 pages. And I always joke with my state fire marshal counterparts, if they presented their DA with a 20-page report, the DA would laugh at them and say, yeah, I can't read this. I don't have time. Their reports are usually around 5 pages. Contains a lot of the relevant data that I would put in. It's not as wordy as mine is. But if they presented that to a U.S. attorney would laugh them out of the room and say, hey, this isn't long enough. It's your first. So to me, I would rather have a longer report than a shorter one. It tends to prove, if done correctly, it tends to prove to whoever's reading it that you know what you're talking about. And I have headed off a few defenses just by my report alone. So again, it's important to get this thing right. A good report might be the most important aspect of your investigation. If you can take one thing away from what I say here today, even if you disagree with everything that I'm talking about and you don't agree with my formatting or what I put in it, that's fine. But if you remember this one thing, you're going to be a better fire investigator. A good report might be and probably is the most important aspect of your investigation. But again, like I said, it's often the one that's most overlooked because it's not fun to do. It's not getting out there and getting into it. It's taking all of that stuff and putting it into a report format, and nobody wants to do that. But as you'll see as we go, it's crucial to a successful investigation. So who is this for? If you're considered an expert in origin and cause investigations, you've already been through the court process. You've been called an expert in court. That's great. That's fantastic. Or those who might be called as an expert. If you haven't had that opportunity, this is for you. I believe that this is good, and I think it's the next slide. We'll go to the next slide. Yeah, the format introduced herein suitable for use by an origin and cause expert of any certification level. So if you're not a CFI yet, if you have your FIT certification, if you don't have any certification, you're just getting into it, you can still use this format. There's nothing in there that's, you know, this is special for CFIs or IAAI CFIs or NAFI CFIs. It's all the same. And it can be presented in court proceedings at any level, local, state, federal, doesn't matter what you're doing, and for any reason, whether it be civil or criminal. And the caveat is, I think. It hasn't been tested. The way I write reports haven't been tested in a lot of these arenas, but I'm pretty sure after talking to a lot of fire investigators that work in the private sector, fire investigators who work at local and state level, that this report would work for them. Now, again, it might be a little long, it might be a little wordy for some levels, but that doesn't mean that it's not admissible and that it's not going to qualify you as an expert, and it's not going to help you in your court proceeding. Another thing, as I went through this, I realized that this presentation is not a basic fire investigation class. It's not meant to teach the scientific method or its use in a fire investigation. It's not intended to demonstrate a proper origin and cause investigation. That's not what I've been tasked to do, and so that's not what we're doing here. I'm basically showing you, I'm assuming that you're all good fire investigators, and the fact that you're probably watching this means you want to get better. So this is basically a presentation that shows you how to synthesize all the data that you've collected and all of the analysis of that data that you've done and how you put it together into a good, solid report. That being said, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you didn't do a good investigation, if you didn't follow the scientific method, if your methodology was way off and your conclusions stink because of it, this isn't going to help you. A good report isn't going to solve all of your problems. So if you got it wrong, you got it wrong. I think, and it's happened to me a few times, that as you go through the process of writing a report, you can tend to think a little bit more about the data that you collected. You think a little bit more about the analysis that you did. Maybe your hypotheses change. Maybe your elimination of the hypotheses change. This gives you a chance to kind of do that over and over again. So again, if you haven't done a good scene, a good report isn't going to help you, because you can certainly do a good report about a bad scene. However, if you've done a good scene, a good report can only help you. A bad report can set you back, but a good report is only going to help you. All right, so this is the structure of what I put in my reports. There's other things, and we'll talk about it at the end, that you could put as a heading. These are literally the headings that I would put into my report. There's a lot of other headings that you could put in. A lot of the data that we'll talk about that could be under those headings, I put in some of these things, some of these categories. An introduction, a problem statement, and a scope of work. What did the place look like before the fire, pre-fire conditions? What did it look like after, which is basically your damage assessment? What were the witness accounts? How did you analyze the collected data? And how did you reach your conclusions? And what are those conclusions? So the intro, short summary of what happened, what you did, and what you concluded. I think it's important to almost make this introduction like a cover sheet. Get it on page 1 in the first couple of paragraphs of what happened. There was a fire. What did you do? I did a systematic evaluation of the scene. And what did I conclude? The fire started here. It was caused by these things coming together to cause the fire. What was your classification if you're going to classify it? Put it up front, especially if you're dealing with a prosecutor. They want to see right away what they're dealing with. You can get into the weeds later, and you should, but right away get into what happened. So here's a sample introduction. Gives you the date, where it happened, fire in the engine compartment and cab of a Kenworth truck owned by R.C. Moore Trucking. Fire spread to surrounding trucks. Basic statement of what was going on, why you got called. Me and another fire investigator conducted the scene exam to determine the origin and cause, conducting a systematic investigation, which included collecting data, conducting interviews, reviewing interviews conducted by other members of the team, determined where it originated, couldn't figure out what happened, and classified it as undetermined. Obviously, in the new 921, there's no classification system. That's going to change depending on your agency. It still says if your agency wants a classification system, you can use one, but it should be consistent with previous 921 classification systems. I don't know what ATF is going to do. We haven't talked about it yet, or I haven't heard, I should say. I'm sure there's been explanations at some level or conversations at some level. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what your individual agencies are going to do. My argument is that in the public sector, I think it helps us to explain to the public what exactly happened at a certain area in one word: accidental, incendiary. Undetermined, obviously nobody likes it, but it's there. And this was one that we needed to use undetermined for. I use capital letters just to make it stand out. This one wasn't prosecuted, so maybe I didn't need to use that, but I do it across all of my reports. They're all pretty much the same as far as calling or classifying a fire and how I do that. So that was it for intro. It's very basic. I think it's necessary to kind of lay it out there right away. Explain to the reader exactly what happened, what you did, and what you came up with, and that's it. If they don't go any further, they at least have the information for the case that you're working right away. Problem statement and scope of work. That is ripped right out of the scientific method. What is your problem statement? What exactly is the issue that you have to deal with? And the scope of your work. I think this is important, especially nowadays where we're being litigated up and down. We're being dragged in front of courtrooms left and right and being accused of all kinds of biases. I think it's important to kind of narrow the scope of what exactly you're doing in this origin and cause report. My problem statement, scope of work, is usually a boilerplate statement. I use it in almost every origin and cause that I write. It establishes the goals of the report, the expectations for the reader as to what you intend to present, and to remind you that it's an expert report and not a police report. It establishes your lane so that you can stay in your lane as you write your report. So here's a little sample. The objective of investigative efforts associated with this report is to establish the origin and cause of the fire incident that occurred at AC Provo Auto on October 25th, 2016. Highlights and summarizes the data gathered by investigators that was determined to be the most significant in establishing origin and cause. Should be noted that the conclusions presented herein are based on the data available to investigators at the time of the report's completion. Therefore, they are subject to change if previously unknown data is identified, properly analyzed, and determined to be sufficient evidence as to fundamentally alter or refute any of the aforementioned conclusions. This is the scope of it. Your talking about your problem, which is the establishing an origin cause of a fire and explaining how you got to those conclusions. And the scope of your work is saying, hey, this was all of the data that we deem necessary to determine an origin and cause that we had on hand at the time I wrote this thing. We all know that down the road, that can change. What your data can change. New data can come in that explains away maybe a hypothesis that you had, or refutes one of the conclusions that you had that you have to deal with. This basically lays it out there that, hey, this is a working document, and at any time in the future, it can get changed if it has to be. This is one of the older ones that I've used. And like I said, I like to go back through my reports, especially my older reports, with a fine-tooth comb and take out phrases or reconfigure phrases that can be problematic for you down the road. So this little highlighted section in red, it's pretty much the same as before, but this little highlighted section in red can cause some problems. It should be noted that this report may not contain every investigative detail considered as part of the origin and cause analysis. It seems like a little innocuous phrase that says, listen, I didn't get into all of the weeds in this report for the, with the intention of being a little brief. I didn't get into everything that was going on through my head. But this was pulled out by an attorney who said, don't use this anymore, because you can be called to task on the idea that, oh, you are leaving stuff out. You're not telling us something. What aren't you telling us? And I thought that was pretty interesting. It's another way of looking at this report, another way of looking at that little phrase and me getting hit over the head with it on a stand. What else did you not tell us? Was the detail that you didn't leave in something that exonerates my client? These are all questions that you really don't want to have to answer in front of a jury, let alone on a stand or in a deposition. So again, in the next one as well, this is what I constantly do, is constantly comb through my reports as I write them, after I write them. Even ones that I don't turn in for a prosecution, I go back and look and say, if this was ever on a stand, was there something in here that could kind of could trip me up? Here's another one. I like this one because it specifically talks about the scientific method. It actually quotes 921 and what the definition of the scientific method is. But down below, we have another little phrase here. SACFI Conley gathered available information related to the fire event, and based on that data, attempted to develop and test all reasonable theories as to where and how the fire could have started. Attempted to does not mean that I did. And if we're following the scientific method, then all of the reasonable hypotheses that we come up with should be tested, whether they be physically tested or tested mentally. Through our understanding of fire science and fire patterns and what have you. Attempted is really going to be problematic for me, because somebody's going to jump down my throat and say, well, it doesn't look like you attempted to. Which ones did you fail to, and why did you fail to? Again, not questions you want to answer based on your writing. So be aware that, yes, you can have this boilerplate statement. It's a good way of kind of narrowing everything down, letting people know, hey, this is a working document. This can change over time. But be aware of these little phrases that are hidden, that could be hidden in some of the boilerplate stuff, especially if you're taking this specifically, taking somebody else's work. Be aware there's other things that can, there's little pitfalls. This last phrase down the bottom I like to add as well. Assessment and identification of parties having civil and or criminal responsibility or liability for the fire incident is beyond the scope of the analysis contained in this report. I take this phrase to heart. And the reason is because we as public sector fire investigators are constantly being hit over the head with the idea that we have expectation bias, or we always want to call something an arson because then we get to make stats and we get to prosecute somebody and everybody gives us a pat on the back. Obviously, we know that's not true in almost everybody that I know, well, I shouldn't say everybody that I know, most people that I work with and most people that I know, that's not the case. To prove that right off the bat, I leave all suspects' names out. I don't get into names because it goes to my theory that I don't care who said it, why they said it. It doesn't matter to me. I care whether or not it was an incendiary fire. As far as my origin and cause is concerned, my expert document, I kind of take my investigative hat off and I work my origin and cause as if I'm going to be a completely separate entity when we get to the stand. That I am no longer Special Agent Kevin Conley. I'm just Certified Fire Investigator Conley. I'm an expert that's been brought in from the outside to do a non-biased, completely neutral examination of the data, the scene, the data, the interviews, and all of that. And I came to a conclusion that yes, the fire was set. It was an incendiary fire. I don't want to get caught up in the attack of bias. So I do my best to head that off in the pass in my origin and cause reports. So like I said, I don't call them by name. I may say a suspect. If I have a confession, I'm certainly going to put that in. But again, I'm not going to use a name. It doesn't matter to me what their name is. Doesn't matter to me who they are, what they are. All I'm taking from them is that data point that they told me they set the fire. This is how they set the fire. Does it make sense with the damage patterns that I observed? Does it jive? Those are the only things that I care about. I don't care about the personal aspect of a case that a regular investigator or detective might care about. So that's a really important one. I can't stress that enough. Some people, again, might disagree with me. They want names. Some people might say it's more powerful if you have names, and maybe it is, but I believe it's more powerful on the other side to say, hey, I'm not biased. I'm doing this completely neutrally. I don't care about prosecuting anybody. All I care about is figuring out the origin and cause of the fire in a scientific way. Okay, again, this is just another one that I just recently used. Again, I mentioned the scientific method based on 2017 edition. Obviously, that'll change to the 2021 edition. This is one that I actually wrote that is an origin and cause concurrence, which is the origin and cause of record is going to be another investigator's. But I've come in to kind of concur with them. I'm not going to sign off on their work, but I'm going to take their work, analyze it myself, and kind of back them up. In my state, the fire investigators really appreciate me doing that because it adds a level of certainty to their work. Hey, I'm not the only one who thinks this. There's another investigator at a higher level, just judicially speaking, at a higher level than me who also agrees with me. They think it holds a lot of weight. This case is going to be prosecuted in the state. So I add this little caveat here. It says all the same things that we talked about before, but it should be considered a companion and report of concurrence to Investigator Peppard's origin and cause report, which will serve as the report of record. Conclusions both presented in both reports based on the data available at the time of their completion. Pretty simple, but just another caveat that I had to add in because I'm going to try to narrow the scope of work. This is not the origin and cause of record. This is just taking his work and the work that I did at the scene, synthesizing the two and saying, hey, yeah, he's on the right track. He came to the same conclusion that I did. Next thing up is pre-fire conditions. And this can easily be skipped over pretty quickly. I used to do it myself. I used to skip over it. I used to write just a very simple explanation of the building construction and the stuff that you learn at the basic investigator schools. I try not to do that anymore because it's become very important to me to show as best I can through words and through pictures and anything else that I can show to the public or whoever's reading it, what this place looked like before the fire affected it. My prosecutor told me that would be more effective because you could show people this is how nice it looked beforehand, And then this person lit a match, and now it looks like this. And that was a very important thing to show. Does it have a huge bearing on what your conclusions are? It can and it can't, depending on what type of structure you're dealing with or what type of fire you're dealing with. But if you're looking for the weight of it, it can be important to show, not just with words, but with diagrams and pictures and whatever, as to what this place looked like before fire damaged it. So what do I put for my verbal descriptions? Ownership and occupation status, who owned it, who was there at the time of the fire, location and orientation of the structure, construction characteristics. I don't go into too much detail about building construction. I'm not a building construction expert. Some people go into really great depths with their building construction stuff. I just don't do it unless it really is necessary to do. Heating systems, get into the makes and models if you need to. But again, if your data doesn't have anything to do with the heating system, I don't know if you really need to get into the weeds as to the makes and models of it. Same thing with the electrical system. You can describe it, but an overly descriptive paragraphs about the electrical system might just muddy the waters, especially if it has nothing to do with an electrical failure. The HVAC system, if it's there. Room descriptions and contents as needed. If you do an apartment complex and 2 apartments are damaged, maybe you want to talk about what those apartments looked like, maybe what they compared to a similar apartment, but you certainly don't have to go into every apartment in the complex and tell us what was in it and what was and how it was done up. It's just not necessary. Fire alert or suppression systems, are they available? Were they in there? Maybe when's the last time they were serviced, that type of stuff, if you need to. A lot of this stuff is if you need to. I don't get too far in the weeds on pre-fire conditions because I don't think it takes the reader any closer to understanding my conclusions. I'd rather use photographs of the place rather than try to describe it with words, because for me anyway, I'm a pretty visual guy. I want to see it. It's great if you describe it to me, but I'm going to get confused. Show me what this thing looked like. So can you get blueprints? Can you get pre-fire photos? You might be able to get it from the tenants, from the occupants. You might be able to get it from like real estate websites are oftentimes keep, especially with private homes, they'll keep pictures of what the place might have looked like the last time it was sold. Google Maps Street View. Great way to show the front of a building. Take a screenshot of it. Most of the time, those Street View maps are pretty. Those photos are pretty updated, at least within the last year or two. So I would I use that pretty liberally. Diagramming. Learn how to diagram if you don't know how. There are plenty of computer programs out there like FireScene that you can learn how to use. Take an online course on it and learn how to diagram properly a scene. It doesn't have to be overly descriptive. It doesn't always have to have measurements or anything like that. But if you can diagram, especially in a larger scene, it's going to become abundantly important to kind of orientate the reader as to what you're doing, what you're looking at. A Google Earth photo will do the same type of thing. It can help do that. It's not always perfect. There's a lot of times, especially up in Maine here, you've got some remote locations, and when you look at it in Google Earth, there's trees covering out over, so you don't see much. Weather. I don't always put weather in, and I guess I should, especially since it's one of the classifications that I have to rule out. I add it in if it's necessary. I think I need to change that. Again, I'm kind of working on my feet here. Use a reputable source. Weather Underground, weather.com, whatever you use, cite it, at least know where you got that info from. Here's a diagram that I did of a case that I prosecuted an individual for lighting these cars on fire. This car specifically on fire. It spread to these cars, took out this wrecker, affected some of this main building. This is probably the most in-depth one that I've done. It's got no measurements on it. It has a small key up here to tell you which way is north. This is not to scale. Hold on, let me go back. It tells you everything you kind of need to know about the place and what it looked like. This is a big used car lot and auto repair place. But it orientates you. I didn't have overhead photos that I could use, but I was able to use this to kind of allow people to understand exactly where this thing, what this place looked like, where were the cameras, where were they looking. Obviously, later on, I'll talk about the cameras in the report because they capture the person doing it, and so forth. That's all done on PowerPoint. PowerPoint's a great thing to use if you don't have those other resources. If you don't have those other programs, use PowerPoint. This is basically just a bunch of boxes and some arrows with some writing and then a little bit of freehand drawing. That's it. That's all you needed. But it tells you everything you need to know about what this place looked like. This is a larger scale fire that I did. This is the warehouse that burned, and I was able to get this overhead view from Google Earth, and I just drew right on it and labeled each quadrant, because when it came down to talking about where the damage was the most most significant, I had to talk about quadrants rather than sides or anything like that, because none of the sides were left of the building. Again, a good way of showing exactly what you're looking at and what burned. Post-fire conditions. This is where you can't use enough mediums to show what you saw the day that you did your investigation, day or days. Use as many resources as you have. Show your work. Prove that you conducted a systematic examination. Be thorough and get as many photographs as you possibly can. I'm a big believer of using photographs right in an origin and cause report, if at all possible, or at least referencing one that you'll use later on. Should you be using photos that the fire department gives you? Absolutely. Absolutely. Does this tell me a whole lot about where the fire started? No, it really doesn't. But it shows me the severity of it. It shows me how bad this place was burning. This is that warehouse fire that I just showed you. It shows me how bad this place is burning before they even started putting water on it. So does it help in kind of showing the scope of the fire? Yeah, absolutely. Would this help with prosecuting somebody down the line? Absolutely. Turns out we couldn't figure this one out. This is a drone footage of that warehouse fire. So I showed you that overhead Google Earth. This is what the place looked like after the fire. This has been rendered. This has been put into a system where they could actually draw lines from point to point and tell me distances. But this is something that the Maine State Police do. They do a great job with this drone footage. I mean, they could get right over the place. This was from the side. Again, they could take a clicker, mouse, put this into a program, take a mouse and show me what's the run of that ledge right there, or how long is that building. It's pretty amazing. Again, this is that same one and from a different angle. Another one from a different angle. These were all in that program. That's why they kind of look like CGI'd almost. This is the scope of this is the damage on the ground. This is something that I wanted to put in my report just to show the scope of the damage of this fire. It was because my conclusion was that the damage was so bad we could not determine an origin, let alone a cause. So in order to do that, I got to show you the scope of the work in this thing. It's not easy enough to just say, yeah, we couldn't figure it out. Show it to me. Show me how bad this place was. Show me how uniform the damage was, and let me come to my conclusion, or kind of take me down the road of like, yeah, this was too much. There's just too much damage here, too much collapse, too much fire damage to come back to one specific place or another, and certainly can't figure out what exactly came together to start this thing. Okay, like I said, photographs are the best way to put your reader inside the scene. They serve as the illustrations to the written descriptions of the damage you observed. When dealing with describing specific fire damage, make sure you don't leave the reader guessing. If you're showing them a photo and you're trying to describe it, don't let them make their own decisions. The use of a photograph processing computer program like Adobe Photoshop, Microsoft Paint, or even PowerPoint can be used to add illustrations over the top of photographs to highlight specific patterns you want the reader to see. You're not making up patterns. You've got a pattern in a photo. You want them to see it. You don't want there to be any guesswork. So I'm going to show you some copies of some stuff that I've done with that photo, with photographs, just in PowerPoint, like I said. Make sure you have a copy. This is a warning. Make sure you have a copy of the original photograph so it can be presented in a courtroom setting. You want a clean photograph. Failing to do so opens you up to claims that you manipulated the photograph. You want to be able to show them, hey, all I did was add like a little red line or an arrow or something like that. You don't want them to say you completely destroyed this picture to make it look like something was there that wasn't. So I talk about a hole in the ceiling. I talk about some damaged structural members. I circle it right there just to let them see that this, I think I talked about how this support beam was more damaged than this was, and I circle it. It's got some, I got a pattern in it that I wanted the reader to see. Circle it. Also, I add words up here. Very important to add a caption to a photo. This one is the view of the ceiling joist. I can't see it because of Zoom, but most significant to damage. And this is, so we're talking about most significant damage. And this one, we had a flue pipe that went right up through these two beams. I wanted to show them with an arrow where that thing went, because in a two-dimensional photograph, it's tough to tell. But this is where it went. You can see how the metal would have touched either side of this, and it got clogged up and caused the fire. Here's another important one. We had a big hotel fire down here, or motel fire rather. And when taking these pictures, I noticed this big V pattern down at the bottom of the, by this door. This was important to me. I wanted the reader to see that this was here. If these aren't there, it was difficult to see that V pattern. Certainly it would be difficult for somebody who's never seen this place, didn't spend any time there, and doesn't understand fire damage patterns, hasn't really spent a lot of time with them. You're going to look at that and say, that's just a mess. I have no idea. But if I draw these in, you're going to see, oh yeah, this damage comes down from the left and it comes down from the right, and it looks like there's a lot more at the floor level that extends upward and outward. That could be of importance. We didn't wind up prosecuting anybody for this, but we did wind up prosecuting somebody who we think did it for a crime later on. So again, this is important. Don't let them guess. Don't let them guess what you're trying to show in a photo. Witness accounts. They're very important, but we all know that they're data points and they're not the be all end all, and witnesses are consistently flawed. They don't always see things the way that they actually are. They're heavily influenced by outside data. They're influenced by their state of mind, by their location at the time of the fire, by how much time has gone past, by who they talk to between the time of the fire and the time you interview them. All these things make witnesses problematic. For me, I'm not going to waste too much time getting into the details of the interviews conducted. I'm going to summarize them. I'm going to take the important parts, and then I'm going to reference back to the actual report. Somebody should be writing a longer report on any interview that's being done. But I don't think it should be in your origin and cause report. I think the summary of those is important to get in, especially if it helped you get to an origin and cause. And that includes a confession. A confession is only as good as the person giving it and whether or not they actually did it. If somebody gives a confession that has no bearing on what you actually saw at the scene, that should be, maybe you mention it, but it also should be noted, like, this doesn't jive with what I saw. Again, don't get too into the weeds. A separate report should be done, and you should reference to that. Say, if you want more information specifically about this interview, then go to that report. Again, try to stick to the scope of your work when you're summarizing the interviews. Don't be using speculative statements. I avoid naming the suspect or naming the person. Even the person who's giving me the information, I try to be as neutral about them as I can. Remember that this is an expert report. It's about an opinion. It's about the data that leads you to those opinions. It's not about somebody telling you exactly what happened. They should be included, though. as much as we've determined that witness statements aren't perfect, they need to be included. If you did any, which we all should have done some, even if it's just the firefighters going in, that could be important information, so they should be included. The analysis. This is probably the most important part of the report. This is where you show your work. This is where you take all of the data that you've just presented to the reader and you say, all of that means this and this is why. Make the connections between what you observed at the scene and what you concluded about the origin and the cause. Go through the hypotheses that may have been tested during the investigation and how and why they were eliminated, and how and why you came to your conclusions. You can't skip this step, and too many fire investigators do. Too many fire investigators talk all about the damage that they saw and what did they notice, and they found a gas can, and then they get to this part and they say, so it's incendiary. That doesn't cut it nowadays. And we all know fire investigators who do this. They either don't know how to do a proper analysis of their collected data. They don't know how to eliminate hypotheses. They don't know what it means to try to disprove hypotheses. They're going to get caught up at some point. This is a good way to prevent yourself from getting caught up that you didn't follow the scientific method. You didn't rule out hypotheses. Show them. And it doesn't have to be long-winded. A very common one that I use in an origin is that, you know, we tested other hypotheses or theorized other areas of origin. However, the damage patterns observed in the scene did not correspond to an area outside of this specific area. That's a little convoluted, and I write it a little bit better than I speak it. But essentially, I'm saying we tested other areas. I don't have to tell you all about them. We just tested them. And just knowing other areas and knowing our damage patterns, all of our damage patterns came back to this one. We couldn't rule this place out because of the damage patterns we saw. And then again, go a step further. If a fire would have started in these other areas, different fire patterns would have been expected. That way you are ruling those out and you're ruling the other one in, or cannot rule the other one out. It's important. You can't skip this step, and it's done too often. We're in a rush. We're in the home stretch here, but this is the key. This is the key to everything. This is showing people that you know how the scientific method works and you know what you're doing. Hypothesis elimination is becoming more of an issue in today's judicial climate. Expectation bias and negative corpus are fodder for opposition. We talked about that already. You can begin to mount that counter argument in your report. How to do it, keep it an expert report, no mention of suspects. To me, that's important. You might think differently. Explain how your hypotheses were eliminated. And almost more importantly, explain why you could not eliminate your final hypothesis and why those are your conclusions. The more hypotheses you can eliminate, the harder it is for the opposition to come up with alternative conclusions. They will start getting into crazy areas that don't make sense, that may not even make sense to a jury who's hearing it for the first time. Again, the way you write is important. The investigator observed a V pattern on the wall, therefore he determined that the fire started at the base of the wall. I've seen this written. Okay, it might tell us something. It might be the possible conclusion, but does this sound better? The investigator observed a large V pattern on the wall behind the furnace. No other fire damage was observed outside this area. The pattern was indicative of a fire originating near the floor and extending outward and upward towards the ceiling. These two phrases, these two little blurbs say the exact same thing and lead us down to the exact same conclusion. But one puts the reader right into the basement, puts you right there at the furnace. You can see the damage, you can see the furnace, you can see the V pattern extending out and up from the floor. This, we could be anywhere. Could be anywhere. This one's a little bit better. Economy of words doesn't always work in an origin and cause report, and this is a perfect example. This jumps from V pattern to the fire started at the base of the wall. This one rules out all these other areas that are around in the basement, puts the person right next to the furnace, and tells you what a fire originating at the floor would do according to your training and experience. It would extend outward and upward. Everybody could see that happening. Conclusions. Should be a short summation of your final hypotheses and why they were chosen. Make sure to include your origin, your cause, and like I said, cause classification, that's out as of the new 921. What you choose to do is your choice. 921 is a guide, it's not a standard. If you are going to use classifications, if you're going to use the old ones, I would make sure that they correspond to the older versions of 921, and I would say use the 2017 version of 921 because it's the most updated one, the most recent one that has classifications in it. Don't be afraid of reiterating what you already discussed in the data analysis section. You're not getting points for being, correct and not repeating phrases. There's no word count on you. So no professor is going to say, well, you just said the same thing over and over again here to get your word count up. Talk about it again, reiterate it again, hammer it home in somebody's head, exactly what you concluded. Make sure that it also jives with what you put in your introduction too. I've seen a couple of times people start with, you can see it, they start with their introduction, they work their way through, maybe it's an accidental cause, they work their way through their report, they've done some other investigative steps, maybe they did some additional analysis, and in the top paragraph they call it accidental, and in the conclusion section they're coming to an undetermined call. So make sure it jives. Reread your reports. Remember, cause is not the same as classification. That's out as of 921, but it's important to remember cause is what brought the fuel, the heat, and the oxygen together to cause a fire, and the classification is where that falls as far as the definitions are concerned. You need both. Yeah, well, not anymore. Here's a sample. This is just reiterating the area that exhibited damage consistent with the origin of fire was located in and around the front driver's side wheel well. Damage there was most severe when compared to the rest of the damage throughout the scene. The extension from this area outward and the decreasing severity further away from the wheel well was also consistent with a fire originating in the wheel well area and extending to other parts of the truck and neighboring vehicles. How many times do I say wheel well? I'm hammering it into their head. It was in the wheel well. Based on the data discussed herein, the investigators determined the fire originated in and around the front driver's side wheel well. Damage to the vehicle was such that a cause could not be determined with any degree of certainty. While there was no evidence of an intentional act, the scene itself revealed no data supporting or negating such an event. Same is true of an accidental cause. Therefore, the investigators could not determine the cause of the fire, classified it as undetermined. Bang, lays it right out. Could have been incendiary? Don't know. Could have been accidental? Don't know. Can't rule either one in or out. Not enough data, you're undetermined all day. This is another one, just kind of break it down, a different format, which tells you right away. This is one that I used to prosecute somebody. So again, it was meant for attorneys to look at and be able to get the information they needed quickly. If they wanted to get in the weeds, they can get into it later, but they get origin, Ford Freestyle passenger compartment, cause. The person started the fire using an unidentified heat source applied to common combustibles in the area of origin, cause classification, incendiary. That was the important info that they needed. This gets into more of the weeds as to how we got there and how our conclusions came about. But this is the information they needed. These are just going over the cause classifications. You don't really need them, but you can have them if you want. Okay, so other possible headings. Like I said, we're kind of coming to the end of this. Other possible headings that you might want to add that breaks down the information for you a little bit easier. One, was there injuries or deaths of civilians and or first responders? I've unfortunately had the opportunity, well, not opportunity, but the unfortunate task of investigating a fire where a firefighter passed away due to conditions that he was in during the fire. A word of warning when you're dealing with that, if you haven't, please remember that you're writing an origin and cause report of the fire. And it's very difficult to separate yourself from the actual death investigation, but that needs to be a separate report. You need to get to the origin and cause first, and then you can work on why did that firefighter die in the line of duty the way that he did. But please remember that those are two different things. It should be mentioned that they died in your origin and cause, but again, unless it has something specifically to do with where the fire started or how it started, maintain your expert status in your report. And don't get into the weeds as to how that person died. Estimated damage value. ATF prescribes this in their origin and cause format. I don't believe I'm trained enough as an insurance adjuster to determine how much that place is valued and how much damage was done based on the fire. I don't add it in because I'm not an expert in it. I'm an expert in origin and cause investigations. So I'm going to stay in my lane and work my origin and cause scenes or reports as just the origin and cause. How much damage does it do? I don't care, to be quite honestly. It's not really, as a public investigator, it's not my concern. A prosecutor might ask that as to how much damage it was. You know, you get that information from insurance agencies. If somebody burned a place down, get it from an insurance company that's also investigating the fire. How much damage was done, how much the settlement was. That could be interesting. Scene security. Larger scenes, you're going to work over a couple of days. It's certainly worth talking about in your origin and cause how that scene was secured so that you can reasonably say, yeah, that scene was clean from the time I got there to the time that I was done with my investigation. No one that shouldn't have been there was in there. That can help certainly insulate you from arguments that something was placed in there that you might find, placed in there after the fire that you might have found. Participating investigators, this is something that I actually have added in. It's nice to put somebody else on the island with you. So as long as you are all kind of concur with the findings and with the conclusions, I think it's a good idea to have other investigators named in the report. This is what we did. It was a team effort. I wasn't on my own here. I'm not out on an island. I'm not disputing what somebody else might say on my team. All of us sit together. On anything that I prosecute, I actually have the other investigators sign off at the end of my report as a concurring signature. Similarly, in what they do, when they do an origin and cause, they have me write a concurrence report. As opposed to sign anything, I have them come in and actually sign my report as if they co-authored. Occupancy and insurance information. You might do this during the pre-fire description, or you might have it as your own individual heading. You might not need it at all. To me, oftentimes it's not necessary unless there's some type of insurance fraud type of scenario at play. I don't know. That could go either way. Legal authority for fire scene exam. That's an interesting topic. A lot of times I am working under the purview of the fire marshal's office, who are tasked by state law to investigate a fire scene. That might be something that I wind up adding in because, again, there's not a whole lot of exigency for us as fire investigators, unless it's prescribed by state law. Or are we there under a search warrant? Are we there with consent? Those are pretty interesting things and not a bad idea to put in. Weather conditions, again, pre-fire, you might add that in there, or you might have a complete separate section. I would tend to include a completely separate section if we thought it was a natural fire. If we thought lightning had something to do with it, I would have a pretty good section of the weather conditions, including some maps, maybe some Doppler images, maybe a lightning strike map to see where lightning may have struck if we're blaming it on lightning. Surveillance footage analysis, yeah, this is one that I add in all the time now because we're getting to the age, and we're in the age of almost always have surveillance footage of a fire. Whether or not it's helpful, I don't know, but you almost always have some type of camera that may help your origin and cause analysis. So yeah, putting in a separate foot and take screenshots of that footage. We just prosecuted a case where two kids lit a house on fire as a part of a drug beef. We had them on camera, 2 Ring cameras on either side of the house that got set on fire, captured the whole thing. I just took screenshots of the fire, how big it got, how quickly, and video of and shots of them walking up and running away. It was right in my origin and cause report. It helped me get to the incendiary determination. So why not add it in? Don't just talk about it. And then evidence collection. If you did any evidence collection, I think it might be a good idea to have that as a separate paragraph or a separate heading and detail how you collected it. Make sure it's within the 921 guidelines. Make sure it's within your own agency's guidelines. Take pictures of how you collected it with your gloves, how you labeled the cans that you did label. If you did a canine, another one I didn't add in here, a canine search. If you did that, have pictures of the canine working. If the canine alerted, have pictures of the canine alerting. Obviously, you're going to take samples of where the canine alerted to. Make sure you document those samples. That could all be under evidence collection or a separate canine thing. If you've got a canine search, I'm sure you're going to have a canine report. Make sure you reference that report. That may or may not have something to do with your origin and cause analysis. So again, those are other possible headings that we didn't cover in here that you might want to add. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation. Like I said before, this is kind of my personal mission in that report writing is an often overlooked skill and overlooked part of investigations that a good fire investigator is going to spend time doing and spend time perfecting and spend time changing over time. As science changes, as different challenges in court tend to change, as you pay attention to those, your reports should change. Don't try to fight the system with your report. Try to figure out how you can present the information that you have, present your hypotheses and your development of hypotheses, present your analysis coherently, and show the world how you come to your conclusions. Don't just let them guess. Don't just throw it out there that, hey, I'm a fire investigator and I know everything. And whatever I say, if I saw a V pattern, so that's where it originated. Tell me why. Get into it and tell me why. So,
Kevin, great.
Gentlemen, that's it.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was great. What I'd like to do now is just bring in Bill Boswell too. And some of the backstory for this presentation was Boswell and I were going to do this together. And then Racine or Kenosha hit and Boz got pulled away over there. And I was told about Kevin's presentation, and this has really worked out really well for us. But prior to that, Boswell had come up with an outline or kind of a go-by the headings, and I'm just going to bring that up real quick, and then Bos is just going to talk through that. If anybody else on the call that's currently here has any questions, this would be a great time to unmute yourself and ask Kevin while I get this this screen share up and going.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Kevin.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right, I got that.
All right, go ahead.
Perfect. Okay, so just what I have in this document that you guys see on your screen that you ultimately get a copy of is essentially our template that we use at DCI to draft our fire scene examination reports. The majority of the stuff that you see in here was addressed by Kevin during his presentation, but I wanted to reiterate a couple of things. And again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. Anything that you see on here can be added, deleted to whatever you need to do to get your report in a proper format that you can present it to a prosecutor, your boss, your peers for technical review, peer review, whatever it might be. But with the understanding that when you write these things, you have no idea whether or not it's going to end up in the court system at some point, or that somebody is going to make an open records request for the documents that you have available related to an investigation that you had done. Kevin brought up a good point early on about report length. When I was at Oklahoma State University in their School of Fire Protection, we had a professor, Larry Borgelt, God rest his soul, that it was a semester-long class on technical report writing, where we would go out and assess industrial processes, fire protection systems, whatever that might be, and we'd have to draft a report detailing everything we gathered about our assessment of a particular process or system. And invariably the question was, well, how long does that report have to be? And Larry Borgelt's response was, how long is a piece of rope? It's long enough to get the job done. That's what your report needs to be, long enough to get the job done. It may be 5 pages, it may be 55 pages. So keep that in mind as you go through. As long as you're able to get from point A of your synopsis and why you're there and your assessment and introduction all the way through to your conclusion and get there effectively so that anybody that's out there reading this can follow you along, then you're golden in the end. It's going to be a good report. So I had a couple other points in here, but keep in mind as you're reading through this, the material that shows up on there in the Times New Roman is kind of our heading section and our some of the canned language. All the rest of the stuff is filler I put in kind of as explanations. You've got the synopsis or the introduction. Again, very, very brief explanation as to why you're there, what you're doing, who called you, and some very, very generic statements about the overall event that ultimately led to a local agency contacting you and requesting your assistance. We talked about the fire scene control and authority. Keep a scene log. If you're going to throw that in there to ensure the prosecutor, to ensure a jury that, over the 7 days that this investigation was taking place, that we had the scene secure 24/7 when we were there. Keep a scene log of who those individuals are, because there may be a request to have one of those folks come back in and testify if something goes kind of off the rails during that investigation. So scene integrity, keep that scene log. We talked about the participating fire scene investigators. One thing that'll happen when this section is in your report, maybe you just showed up to help hump a shovel and to dig this thing out. If this goes to trial, you can bet there's going to be a subpoena that comes your way, and you're going to wonder, what the heck is this all about? I didn't do anything. I was just there working a shovel for 3 days. But that data should be in here, so there's no question that you didn't purposely not disclose something to the defense or the prosecution. So get that information in there if you can. Ownership, occupancy of the structure involved. We talked about that a little bit. This also kind of bears into when you talk about legal access. Who are you going to speak with and get approval from to come onto that property and conduct that origin and cause investigation? Are the property owner and the occupant the same people? Can the landlord give you access to a renter's property? Those are things you're going to have to consider. We'll talk a little bit more about that briefly, because legal aspects in and of themselves is an hour plus presentation. The property insurance information, if you can get it, it might not be important in every case that you do, but if you're dealing with a case that you may believe could be an insurance fraud related case after you're done analyzing all of that data, having some of that information in there could be important as your investigation goes forward. The occupancy of the structure at the time. So these are the folks that are inside or nearby when that fire is first discovered. If you say that the home is unoccupied at the time that the fire was reported, that may help alleviate any implication of saying, oh no, it was unoccupied at the time of the fire. Well, if you got a bad guy in there setting a fire and he's pouring gasoline and lighting gasoline, or he's setting the edge of a bed on fire, the home isn't technically unoccupied at the time of the fire, right? There's somebody in there taking care of setting that fire. And these little anecdotal bits that I bring up aren't just to be picky-uni. Each of these little things are something that has come up in a courtroom somewhere along the line in my career. So it's more of a cautionary tale, if you will. Legal authority for conducting that fire scene examination. In Wisconsin and every place else around the country, when we're dealing with the Fourth Amendment, we have emergency exceptions to the Fourth Amendment. We have some statutory requirements regarding fire investigation and who's doing what and when and whose responsibility it is. Kevin mentioned exigency when we're dealing with some of these, some scene access, but once that fire scene emergency is done, and the minute you start sending equipment back to the firehouse, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to err on the side of caution and say that exigency is over. I need to get in there somehow, some other way, whether that's consent, special inspection warrant, criminal search warrant, whatever it might be. You need to start looking at another avenue for getting that job done. Again, that's another hour and a half presentation. I'm not going to beat that horse here. Weather conditions, we talked a little bit about that. If you believe it has some kind of bearing on the fire, the initiation and spread of the fire, whether that's from a lightning strike to 40-mile-an-hour gusty winds, include that data. We've got our fire scene description. This was a catch-all with one of Kevin's earlier sections in his reports, where you've got a lot of stuff in there and you're talking about what that building was like pre-fire. Now, the fuel load matters, the building construction matters, alterations to building construction and building layout and interior finish, all that stuff matters as regards fire dynamics and is definitely going to impact your assessment of how fire moved from point A to point B. So anything that might be important as far as that building construction goes and fire dynamics should be in that section of your report. Your interviews, your witness statements, again, this is oftentimes one of the most important pieces of data or multiple pieces of data that we include in our fire scene reports. The first in firefighters, 911 callers, very, very important data point. If there are 7 911 callers that have called into the dispatch center and are reporting this fire, you should have addressed at least 7 different 911 caller interviews in one form or another in your report. Because much like anything else, every one of those individuals has a different vantage point. I think of there's a meme that's out there regarding perspective, and there's a number 6 on the ground. One guy standing at one end, one guy standing at the other. One guy sees it as a 9, one guy sees it as a 6. They're both correct. It's all about perspective. That data needs to be in there in your interview report section. What else? Bill's scrolling pretty fast. That usually means I should catch up and talk a little faster, because what are we coming into? Oh, it's 10:20. We're good. We're good. So your fire scene examination, right? So this section in Kevin's presentation, this is the analysis of that data collected. Everything that we've got up before this point, from building construction, witness interviews to 911 callers, all of that stuff comes into here, and now we work with your assessment of all of that data. We explain some of the things that we're talking about here. So this is what you're working toward to support your final hypothesis. Let's see, I give an example in here. We talk about the front door of the house. You walk up to the thing. What does it open? You see it as open when you arrive at the scene. Well, you need to figure out why it's open. Was it forced open by the fire department? Was the door missing pre-fire? Did somebody else leave it open? Make sure you assess why that door is open. We talked about adding photographs into your reports. The old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That is absolutely correct. 1,000 pictures in your report might just be a little bit silly. But if you can provide context for those 1,000 pictures and help get your point across as far as your assessment of that fire scene and what it means, that's where it needs to be. All right, some canned language that's in there. We talk about the scientific method and why we apply it, and 921's recommendation for application when you're doing fire scene examinations. Keep in mind that the language that is presented in this document comes from the 2017 edition of NFPA 921. This does not come from the current 2021 edition that, interestingly enough, after some discussion last night with Bill Fulton, that document appears to have gone into effect in April of 2020, even though it wasn't available until just a few weeks ago for us to use. So bear that in mind. I have no idea what implications that may or may not have at this point, but it is what it is. Bill Fulton, anything else on that screen? You kind of stopped scrolling, so that means I must have caught up a little bit.
You did.
Do you want to talk about the video analysis since you threw that in?
Sure. So with the video analysis section, like Kevin had mentioned before, we're capturing things on surveillance cameras and social media. It's just important that when you are trying to put those videos and footage in context, it's important that you do something called normalization or normalize that time. one of the recommendations that we have is that the universal time can be located if you go to www.time.gov. That is a rolling clock. You can pull it up on your smartphone. You can go to the surveillance monitor at your facility. You can lay the two next to each other and then take a photograph of it, and it shows the offset of the time. This offset of the time at the surveillance screen to actually the real time or the base time, to give that variance in time, which may not be super important if it's a minute or two off, but if you're comparing that data to data from the 911 communication center to radio traffic, you just need to normalize all those different sources of time and information.
All right, just briefly about evidence collection. And Kevin had talked about that in his presentation as one of the other added possible headings. Again, this is in every one of our reports that we deal with. If we did not collect anything, we don't just add an N/A for not applicable. We will add in there that no items of evidentiary value were collected during this fire scene examination. However, if you do make those collections, everything should be documented here. You should also include the current status of the items and any results of laboratory testing, if indeed that was done. That should be documented here. Sometimes because of the time frame between the submission of the lab and the actual receipt of the results, you may need to do a supplemental report at a later date. Generally speaking, when we collect something, we will collect it and we'll turn it over to the local agency for them to admit into their property inventory and ultimately submit to the crime lab, and then take the return of the evidence from the crime lab once the processing is done. When you do that, or if you do that, you need to bear in mind that when you're crossing agencies with chain of custody with evidence, I may collect it with an item number A. Local police department may then inventory that as item 1. And once it gets to the crime lab, we're back to, at least Wisconsin State Crime Lab, they use letters for designation. We may be back to a different lettering sequence in that submission of the items. A small table here or another supplemental report that documents the item number from the collecting agency, from the submitting agency, and from the crime lab should be included so you can cross-reference when it comes time for prosecution. Otherwise, it becomes an absolute train wreck trying to figure out who did what, where it came from, and what item B written on the can means, but the crime lab report says it's item B10. Makes a difference, and it'll help keep things clear for you later on. Fire scene documentation. Let's see, what am I saying here? You want to provide information related to what you did to document the fire scene beyond the narrative, right? We've talked a lot of things through the narrative about, how we got from point A to point B, but this is photographs, this is diagrams, timelines that maybe you work together with an intel analyst to put together data from the CAD system, dispatch center, might be from cell phone documentation, might be from video surveillance. If you can use all of those items to stitch together a timeline of the events that unfolded that ultimately resulted in the fire, that could be very, very helpful for you later on down the line. Bill skipped by that. We'll just keep moving. Fire suppression systems. Unless you're fairly well versed in what the systems are, what they do, how they're supposed to operate, keep this somewhat generic. If you need to get a little bit deeper in the weeds, reach out to either the alarm system company or fire suppression system company that installed it, or to a fire protection engineer that can help you take a look at the data that you're looking at. If you want somebody that can maybe make an assessment for you of why the building sprinkler system was completely overwhelmed by the fire, work with a fire protection engineer that can help you through some hydraulic calculations perhaps to figure out what happened and why that system didn't work. Had it been tampered with? Had it just been a poor design? Was it poor water supply? Whatever it may be. Kevin mentioned staying in your lane with things. If this is not in your lane, definitely don't go there. Find somebody else that can ride along with you in that lane. Fire-related deaths and injuries, again, whether it's civilian, fire service, law enforcement, whatever it might be. If there is a victim, that information should be provided here. It should include information related to Was there a positive identification of who that individual was? You maybe don't necessarily need to get into the fact that they use familial DNA or dental records to do that. That's up to you. If your agency requires it, go ahead and put it in. Otherwise, leave that to the forensic pathologist of the medical examiner's office. Also include the official cause and manner of death provided by whoever did that autopsy, a forensic pathologist, medical examiner, whatever it might be, and toxicological data related to maybe most definitely carbon monoxide presence or absence and what that percentage was, maybe a drug screen tox, ethyl alcohol, whatever it might be, items that might be used to assist your reader in understanding maybe why a particular victim wasn't able to make it out of the fire. Maybe they called 911, but what prevented them from getting out of the bedroom at the back of the house? Maybe it has nothing to do with their level of intoxication at some point. Maybe they've got some other health issues. Some of that stuff should be addressed in here. But again, stay within your lane. Finally, your conclusion. This is where you're going to rehash your final origin and cause classification. Maybe you want to regurgitate the whole thing and go back through some of those major punch points that you got from your analysis of that data from the fire scene examination up above. Maybe you can be more succinct. There's a lot of stuff that comes through these reports that are stylistic. And as someone who gets to review other agents' reports from time to time, not reviewing for style is a very, very hard thing to do. You're looking for technical accuracy, right? And you're looking for continuity. Kevin mentioned that towards the end of his presentation, making sure that when you get to this section that you're congruous the whole way through, back through that report, from your initial synopsis, through your building construction, through your fire scene examination, all the way down to this conclusion. Make sure everything jives. Is that about it? I think that's it.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Kevin,
Bill.
do you have anything to add to what Boz had just gone through there? That handout will be available once we make this recording available as a guideline. Kevin, we can take yours as well. We can make that available to people. I mean, like you
Sure.
said, there are different styles or different formats. You know, these are some headings. It works for you, Kevin. It works for Boswell. You know, I despise writing my reports, but I do appreciate it at the end when I'm completed the report. I mean, to me, it's a work of art. Like it's a thing of beauty to take it all, put it all together, and just the way that it flows. I do like images in mine. I do like taking PowerPoints and using arrows and circles, and I really enjoy reading other people's reports and taking, you know, little bits and pieces away from everybody to kind of come up with your own style. So like Kevin had mentioned before, you have to be comfortable with your report because it's technically your name that's going to go on the report. You have to defend that when you're on the stand. It's not going to be your supervisor or your chain of command testifying to it. It's going to be you and your the word escapes me right now, but your professional career. I mean, it's you on the stand and you're testifying to it. It's a direct reflection of the work that you are putting into it because you are the person on the hot seat. Do you guys have anything else to add before we end the recording?
I think it's very clear that my reports are going to be a little different than Bill Boswell's reports, but the common thread that runs through it is that he's painting you a picture with logic and reasoning that get to a conclusion. At no point in his report are you going to see, I've been a fire investigator for however many years, I saw this, that means this is what it is. That doesn't cut it anymore. We're not superheroes. We're not know-it-alls. A lot of us are pretty dumb. It doesn't cut it to just say, I'm trained in this, so that's what it is. You've got to show people your work. You've got to show how you get to that final conclusion. And it's got to follow that line of reasoning that the scientific method allows you to do. So there may be different headings, there may be different theories about what needs to be in, what doesn't need to be in it. But as long as you're following that same path, you're going to be okay. So it was a perfect example of two investigators having two different styles of reports that may include some stuff, may not include some stuff, but all the time following that path of the scientific method to get back to that one spot. So
agreed. That's what it's all about. You know, every one of these that we do, All we're trying to do is explain as best we can in that report what happened and why we got from here to here.
Great. Well, we appreciate everybody joining us. We will put out a time and date in the future to get back together as a group and chat amongst ourselves and talk fire investigation. So again, we appreciate your time and attendance, and stay safe.